Hey there, folks. This is the Best Movie Year podcast. My name's Dan Barrett. I'll be joined in a moment by Simon Foster. This movie we're about to watch this week, it's called Blind Date. It came out in 1987. It has Bruce Willis in it, Kim Basinger. You know, it's a proper movie. I was a bit excited to watch it. We'll get to whether that excitement continued on a few minutes into the movie, but that's a question for a bit further in. The idea of this movie is this thing of you meet up with a friend of yours and they're like, hey, I had this blind date. It just went terribly wrong. Can you believe this happened? And then this happened and this happened. And the movie tries to capture the spirit of that. Does it do it successfully? We'll find out. This is Blind Dates on the Best Movie Year podcast. Folks, my name's Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster. Simon Foster, Blind Date. Is this the first time you saw the movie?
Oh, good Lord, no.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Best Movie Year. No, this was very much a film that was on everyone's radar back in 1987. It was the film that Bruce Willis was rolling the romcom dice on after the success of the Moonlighting series, and I know we're going to talk about that quite a bit. It was released into US cinemas March 27, 1987. It made $39 and a bit million at the US box office, or in 2025 dollars, nearly $110 million. So it actually did pretty well. If a rom-com nowadays did $110 million at the US box office, that would be considered a success. It hit number 23 on the box office mojo chart of that year. So it was it wasn't a runaway success for Mr. Willis and Miss Basinger, but it was a sizable box office hit for these two, who weren't bankable stars at the time. This was his first credited role.
Not first credited role, first leading role.
Leading role, I should say, yes. And she was not an ingenue, as her performance in this may suggest. She'd been a Bond girl, of course, many years before in Never Say Never Again. So this had a lot of pedigree about it. Was it any good? Dan Barrett, over to you. Who's gonna bite the bullet on this one?
Okay, look. So when the podcast was first suggested, and I came up with this list of 100 movies,
you weren't getting on this one, were you?
Firm memory of Simon Foster really pushing the idea that maybe we shouldn't do blind dates, and I heard that and thought, you know what? This is a movie which absolutely speaks to me as being one of the films of the year in terms of just kind of sort of memories of, hey, this is a movie that certainly existed that no one really talks about much anymore. Okay, but it seemed, negligent for us not to talk about the movie as part of it all. So I said, no, we're keeping that in there. And also, I had a very vague memory of it. This was absolutely a film which, I'd never watched this as an adult before, but I do remember being a kid and this being like a VHS rental by my parents.
Sure.
And I've got
Massive
a very strong
VHS
memory.
release.
Yeah, I just got the strong memory of the very end of the movie, them being at an outdoor garden party. I remembered it being a wedding, but I wasn't really 100% certain about that. And I remember that they kind of jumped into a pool and ran away together or something. And so that was in the back of my head, but I didn't remember anything else here. I love Bruce Willis. I was excited by the idea of Bruce Willis just after Moonlighting. So Moonlighting kicked off in 85. So, this is certainly the year after it became a smash hit success from the very beginning.
Yeah.
He was clearly looking for that film to, keep driving the Bruce Willis brand out there. And so they settled on this. And so he went and made this as his first film post Moonlighting success. I was keen to see what that would look like.
Wait a minute. Let's have a look what it looks like. Why don't we play the trailer?
Let me just finish my thought, which was that I looked at Letterboxd. I saw what you rated it.
Yeah.
I saw what I rated it. And
Yeah.
I think you like this movie a little bit more. Let's play the clip.
Less than 12 hours ago, this man had a good job and a promising future. Last night, he went on a blind date. Today, he's paying the price.
You're allowed 2 phone calls.
Hey, Ted, it's me. Walter. Your brother, Walter. And I'm just calling to thank you for fixing me up with Nadia last night. Hey, she's gorgeous. Oh, you were right about not letting her drink. It was really cute how a little champagne brought out those charming quirks in her personality.
Walter, what?
She made quite an impression on my boss, too.
I'm fired. Fired?
But you know what really elevated the evening out of the realm of the ordinary? Having Nadia's psychotic ex-boyfriend as a chaperone.
You son of a...
And you know those dancing lessons we had to take in junior high, Teddy? finally came in handy.
Dad! Moonwalk! I hate that!
In fact, my evening was so entertaining, so exhilarating, so stimulating, such an utterly unforgettable experience that if I weren't already behind bars, I'd be committing a murder right now! Yours!
Kim Basinger, Bruce Willis, Blind Date.
Anybody out there got 10 grand for bail?
Before you delve in, I'm going to cede the floor to you for a while to talk because I've talked too much. I think it's important to say that just because you don't like something, it shouldn't be that you can't find something nice to say about it.
True, I agree. Absolutely agree. So I'm going to read a
gonna
plot
say-
synopsis.
I was just going to say, I think that Bruce Willis is winning. I think that Kim Basinger's almost winning. Okay, but this is a film that absolutely survives on the strength of a incredible supporting and what would you even call a cast member who's just got like half a line, because there are so many faces in this that everybody knows remarkably well. But Simon, tell us what's this movie about, who's in it, and give us the details.
All right, a quick plot synopsis. This won't take long, believe me. When upwardly mobile bachelor Walter Davis, Bruce Willis, is set up with his sister-in-law's pretty cousin, Nadia Gates, the Kim Basinger, a seemingly average blind date turns into a chaotic night on the town. Walter's brother Ted, Phil Hartman, tells him not to let Nadia drink alcohol, but he dismisses the warning and her behaviour gets increasingly wild. And Walter and Nadia's nighttime odyssey is made even worse as Nadia's former lover, the psychotic David, John Larroquette, relentlessly follows them around LA late at night. That is the plot summation. I don't think it fully captures just how effectively obnoxious this film is in several parts. Now, I saw this film, as I mentioned, I saw it at the cinemas. Think from memory, and this is really stretching the memory a little bit, it was one of Parramatta's cinemas here in Sydney's West, the Roxy Cinema, most likely, and then a couple of times on VHS. This was absolutely a movie that video store owners were very high. It was a very popular rental item. But having said that, despite being a big Moonlighting fan and a big Kim Basinger fan, this film never seemed like a big deal for me, and it's certainly been 30 odd years since I've watched it with any great interest.
Wait, sorry, I'm getting a message in. Nope, sorry, the official word's in from the timekeepers. You're actually the last person to have ever watched this movie.
Now, well, see, that's funny because it is a film that is remembered fondly by a certain age group. It is. I think those that absolutely, and this is why I'm interested in talking to you about it, because you and I are huge Moonlighting fans, and we love the Bruce Willis of the period, although his movie choices in the wake of the Moonlighting success until he took a pivot into action movie territory with Die Hard.
Sorry, just bear in mind, Die Hard was only the year after this one. He would have made this movie straight off the back of Blind Date.
Yeah, but well, he had Sunset, which was another Blake Edwards film, and we haven't even got to the director of this yet, the great Blake Edwards. Well, not so great by this point in time. So, as I mentioned, this was his big throw of the rom-com dice after the success of Moonlighting. But the chemistry he had with Sybil is not on display with Kim, which isn't because they're both not trying really hard in this. They both are trying really hard. I think it's really odd that they should choose a character for him where he is so out of control when his TV personality, he became famous on television for a character that was totally in control. It's like he's deliberately taking a 180 twist with his role as Walter in this. Is that fair to say?
Look, here's the thing. Quite often I'll take a very different stance than you do. In fact, I don't think I've ever actually agreed with you on anything before in the history of humanity. Okay, but I think that you're completely on the money with that.
Thank you. Whew, that is quite a moment for podcast history.
Is it ever?
Yeah, so I think that I wouldn't say he's miscast because he's capable of pulling this off, but I think the material he's got to work with leaves him floundering in key moments.
So let's talk about that material for a moment.
Yes,
so
please.
if you load up the IMDb and take a look at the credited writers, okay, and also you do a bit of further research, basically you will find this has been through a number of different revisions.
Yes.
Okay, there's I think 4 uncredited writers with their names against this one. Like it's clearly a sign it's gone through the ringer. And when you watch the film, you can tell that tonally it shifts a bunch of times throughout the course of the movie, from scene to scene, like that different films. It really is a mess of a movie. But Simon. I can't remember what the point was I wanted to make.
No, you're right. It's absolutely... It was recognised as being a big roll of the dice for Bruce. The studio knew they were
sorry.
birthing a movie star with
Sorry,
this
Simon.
film.
I know. No, let's backtrack. This is exactly the point that I wanted to make. Okay, which was the original conception for this movie, Blake Edwards getting involved,
Yes.
okay, was the film was going to star Madonna and Sean Penn.
Well, I can see it.
Yeah, so that was the premise of the movie. So that's where they started, and then those two dropped away from the film, okay, for good reasons. Okay, and then that's when the film just ends up being completely mutilated and became something else.
You're absolutely right. There's a lot of names involved with the production of this movie that were, at the time, studio, not lackeys, but real studio men who were given the reins on films like the Look Who's Talking series. The producer is a guy called Jonathan D. Crane, and he's most well known for the Look Who's Talking films. The original script was written by Dale Lorna, who was a big deal back in the 80s and into the 90s. He wrote Ruthless People before this. He wrote Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and he wrote My Cousin Vinny after this. But he'd all but disowned the final version of Blind Date based on his original script. It was so far off the mark. Blake Edwards, we should talk about Blake Edwards a little bit here, because he is an absolute doyen of Hollywood, came out of the early days of television. He was an actor, then became a producer, then became a director. He is of huge note to me because he directed The Party, one of my favourite films of all time, and there is certainly big chunks of The Party's DNA in some of this movie's farce and the door slamming nonsense that goes on at the end, and the party scene where she first gets drunk. That's classic sort of Party. But in The Party, they had a talent like Peter Sellers to pull it off, and good material. In Blind Date, they do not.
2 things. Sorry, one, you really hit upon one of the key words here. Something which we talk about on our other podcast, Screen Watching, a fair bit, is the idea of the party movie. Okay, the party movie is something that I don't think really exists in cinema anymore and hasn't for a couple of decades. But this to me kind of feels like one of those sort of party movies where the idea isn't necessarily that you've got a movie that's supposed to be, ever watched again, but instead everyone's just coming to the cinema to have a great time watching it, and then by the end of the movie it's just a disposable bit of nonsense. Okay,
yes.
And the film absolutely fits into that pretty well. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a shitty party to go to. The other thing is, Simon, can I just drop in a little bit of a fact here? When I was 11 years old, I went and saw one of my first sort of like proper grown-up movies at the cinema.
My goodness.
Okay,
Caligula?
and it was... No.
Salo?
That was a few years after that, Simon, 1991. 11 years old, I went and saw the Blake Edwards film Switch.
Yep, with Johnny Depp and the lovely Ellen Barkin.
Johnny Depp's not in it.
Jimmy Smits, not Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Jimmy Smits, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And?
terrible. terrible movie. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's kind of like my entry point into like grown-up cinema.
He had when I first started falling in love with and I was watching everything at the movies, was sort of 79, 80, and Blake Edwards had a bunch of big hits then. He did 10 with Dudley Moore. He did SOB with Julie Andrews, and he did a wonderful, one of my favourite sort of comedies of all time, Victor Victoria. But from that point onwards, he kind of was just remaking 10. He did Mickey and Maude. He did this terrible Ted Danson film called A Fine Mess. Then he did Blind Date. Then he did Skin Deep with John Ritter. Then he did Switch. So he's kind of just regurgitating the same, sort of stuff, that adult romantic comedy thing for the best part of the decade, and it sort of saw
Was
out
that
his
tail
career.
end that you fell in love with cinema? Is that correct?
No, it wasn't. 10 is a very funny film. SOB's a bit sort of on the nose, but Victor Victoria is wonderful. And of course, then when you go back, Blake Edwards directed Peter Sellers in The Party and a whole lot of great films through the 70s as well. But by the time he got to Blind Date, he was a director for hire, and they realized that this was the sort of thing that he did do well back in his heyday. But you're right, this had gone through so... The photocopied scripts were so blurry by this stage that they just couldn't get anything up on the screen that was worthwhile. We haven't mentioned very quickly in too great a detail Kim Basinger, who looked so much like Taylor Swift in this. I could not believe how much she was. When they do a Kim Basinger story, they should cast Tay-Tay, that's for sure. She was 33 when she filmed this, which wasn't young. She'd already had, like I say, the Bond girl stuff with Never Say Never Again, 9.5 Weeks, The Natural. She'd done a Sam Shepard film, which she got great reviews for, called Fool for Love. But this felt like a career backwards step for her. She saw some potential in doing this broad comedy shtick, and I don't blame her for trying this, but she fares much better in Nadine, which is the film she made after this with Jeff Bridges, and then again with Dan Aykroyd in My Stepmother is an Alien, which was another bit of silly fun she did. But this is certainly the less of her comedic roles.
So, Simon, I think it's probably important at this point that we talk about some of the supporting cast on this one.
Yes, let's do that.
First of all, top-level idea, John Larroquette deserved better.
It's one of the most offensive subplots in a film that I've seen in a long time. He's a psychotic stalker
Keep
played
in mind,
for
Simon,
laughs. Yes.
Keep in mind, you will be watching Police Academy 4 next week.
Very true. That's very true. Look, you and I are Larroquette fans, but this is terrible stuff that he's doing in this.
It really was. You look at this and you really get a sense as to why John Larroquette never really made it in cinema, because there were just bad choices being made at the beginning. And I think he could have been a big screen cinema like comedy icon, but certainly not because of this.
Well, he rolled the dice. He did that thing with Kirstie Alley. What was that called? It was like all the kids in the home, like a with six you get egg roll sort of comedy. I can't remember what it was called, but it was terrible. Yeah, you're right.
It wasn't Sibling Rivalry, was it? It was something else.
No, it wasn't Sibling Rivalry. The only thing I remember John Larroquette being of any worth in on the big screen was as the camp commandant in Stripes opposite Bill Murray when he got a lot of big laughs. After that was 81, so yeah, this is a long way in the rear vision.
As an aside, why is the John Larroquette show not available to stream or just view anywhere? What happens to that program?
Focus, Dan, focus.
Sorry, it's a topic of mine. Okay, a couple of other people.
Yes.
Phil Hartman, I think, actually steals the film a number of times throughout the clip. First scene, though, that really just actually got me laughing out loud properly was watching Phil Hartman do this.
She's gorgeous. Will you stop it?
Oh my God, I almost forgot. Listen, don't get her drunk. She loses control completely.
But don't get her drunk. If you get her drunk, she loses control.
Ted, are we talking about a loss of inhibitions here, or does she pee on the floor?
What does lose control mean?
She gets real wild.
She gets real wild.
Phil Hartman, is there anything you want to say there other than the fact that Phil Hartman, R.I.P.,
One of the great missed opportunities in cinema comedy. His passing was terrible and tragic, not just on a human level, which was gut-wrenching, but to the industry and to what he maybe was going to bring as years go by. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that the few short scenes he had in this were very funny. I don't know whether we're just so into his voice and what it did for The Simpsons and what it did on Saturday Night Live that we can just hear his voice and start laughing because we're so attuned to it. But regardless,
like, it's
very funny.
Isn't that kind of what you want, though? Like, ultimately, this is supposed to be a party movie where you're just there to have a silly good time. The fact that, and look, obviously this is pretty early Phil Hartman's career. Well, Phil Hartman being sort of known as a screen presence. So I think this is about like 2 years of him being on Saturday Night Live at this point. I think he came in like 85, 86, thereabouts. So anyway, he's only really sort of just known to people's screens at this point. But for the, 7 or 8 years prior to this, hugely influential in comedy. He was big at Second City. But also, I don't know if you know this, but Pee Wee Herman, when Paul Reubens was first developing the character, it was in tandem with Phil Hartman.
Was it really?
Yeah, he really helped him build that up.
I did not know that at all. That's interesting.
Also, Phil Hartman, early in his career, was a graphic designer. Okay, and that's kind of what he was doing as a professional before he threw it all into Chase Comedy.
Chase Comedy. I'm glad he did. The other name, one of the other names that doesn't fare well in this is Mark Bloom. Now, you may not know Mark Bloom's name.
I know Mark Bloom. He's great.
He did.
Not in this.
No, he's not. He does one of the most terrible monologues at the start of this film. What I Did Last Night is so cringy. We promised on this podcast we weren't going to be those sort of reviewers go like and view it with 2025 woke or glasses on that maybe put a lot of the comedy from that period in time to shame. But even back then, that monologue at the start where he talks about having the girl in the back seat of the limousine is just the most awful bit of extended dialogue. And I don't know why Bruce Willis is running like crazy to get to the meeting, and then he slows down to listen to Mark Bloom's terrible story from last night. It's so stupid.
But this is kind of the thing with the movie. So the film kind of wants to be a little bit critical of guys like that. Like that guy is not a character to be celebrated at all.
No, and that is setting him up for a fall. You're right. That monologue is setting him up for a big fall later at Kim Basinger's sort of will.
But when they get to the meeting, okay, which takes place straight after that scene, okay, there's like one woman in the meeting, and the boss is really misogynist and makes some sort of reference to, I guess, like the woman in the room or something. Okay, and so there's a woman there who just looks really stern and unhappy with what's being said. And so the film is certainly self-aware enough to say, hey, look, this sort of level of sexism just isn't really on. But it just kind of seems like Blake Edwards just, it's lip service to that.
Oh, it absolutely is lip service.
It's like we've acknowledged it now, and now we can tell the jokes that we actually want to tell. And it's just kind of... It's a disjointed mismatch of philosophical sort of viewpoints, and it doesn't hang together well. Either commit to it or don't.
You're absolutely right, and it's really sad coming from Blake Edwards because he was absolutely lauded by the LGBTIQ community for Victor Victoria, which was a cross-dressing story and with a very strong sort of gay man lead character in Robert Preston. And then by the time he gets to something like Blind Date, he's clearly lost his moral rudder or his sense of what's right and wrong on the big screen. He's doing it for the cash, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Now, just on Mark Blum, he actually died of coronavirus a couple of years ago when that first broke out, pretty early into the epidemic as well. But if people, don't know you by name, if you looked at him in this, you probably wouldn't necessarily recognize that he was the same guy that sort of looks like the face that I know from later in his career. But Mozart in the Jungle, if people ever checked out that Prime Video program, he was very prominent in that show through the 4 or 5 seasons that ran for. But, certainly if you look at his face there, you recognize him from all sorts of character roles over the years.
Crocodile Dundee, wasn't he Kozlowski's other half in Crocodile Dundee before Mick turned up?
Oh, he was in everything.
I'm absolutely certain he was. Hey, speaking of which, have we done all the cast members? Oh no, we should mention William Daniels at the end, who turns up and lends an also very distinctive voice as the father of. Which, look, oh my God, here we go down this path. Is it the most stupid plot twist in the world that the man who's the defense lawyer, the John Larroquette character, and who was central to the actions of that night and leading Bruce Willis to be in court that day, is then made his defense attorney and given the opportunity to marry Kim Basinger? It was the most just horrible bit of plotting I can remember in a movie we've watched, Dan Barrett, and we've watched some clangers.
The only thing that would make it worse is if what was I saying? Sorry, I'm just distracted from another conversation we had pre-podcast. That if Bruce Willis was like assigned to be his butler, that could be the only thing that would make it worse.
Worse or better?
Oh, fair enough.
Such a preposterous twist.
A couple of other faces in there that I think are worthy of mentioning. Timothy Stack, who's a face in comedy that people may know. I know him best playing, I think the character's name was Dick Dietrich from a show called Nightstand, which they used to play on the Comedy Channel here all the time. It was a bit of a parody of the 90s talk shows like Oprah and Ricky Lake.
Okay.
Anyway, very funny guy. He's a great sort of comedy face, but, people probably don't really know him. He was in Seinfeld. He was the guy that ran the pen store. Was it the pen store?
Yes, I do know who you're talking about.
No, he wasn't a pen store. That is he was the optometrist, where he was supposed to give like a nice face discount to Elaine, I think, and I don't know, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Other faces in there, Armin Shimmerman, who people would know from...
Yes.
He was under serious makeup in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but he was the principal for a few seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He's certainly a character actor that people have seen around the place for years and years. I want to say... Gosh, if my memory serves, he was a regular in Benson back in the day. My memory's a bit shaky there. I think that might be true. And then the other thing is there's an actor whose name I don't know, but he's Babu Bot from Seinfeld.
Ah, well, I've done my research. The actor's name is Brian George Babu Bot.
That's right.
In the Seinfeld story. Born in Jerusalem to Jewish parents, who had immigrated to Israel from India. His father was born in Iraq but raised in Bombay, and his mother was born and raised in India, and he was raised in London. So that's why he's got this incredible sort of outward appearance, but also this great voice, which he can adapt to any sort of ethnicity, I guess you should say.
Well, look, he has this very lovely British accent. And, like, he sounds fantastic, but quite regularly he's asked to put on some pretty extreme, ethnically appropriate, I don't know, like, accents. So in Seinfeld, obviously, he's playing an Indian immigrant.
Pakistani.
But also,
Pakistani,
sorry. But then also you'll find him in How I Met Your Mother as a sort of semi-regularly appearing character. He was a taxi driver in that one, again with a very broad accent.
Like I say, there's talent in this film, just not given the material to work with. The role of alcohol. As a non-drinker, I want to broach this. Walter, the Bruce Willis character, is an absolute dick because he insists on giving her champagne. He's been warned twice not to, and she says no, but he keeps going. So he's an enabler, and it's very hard to feel a whole lot of empathy or sympathy for what happens to him. Hey? Yeah, well, exactly. It's the 80s, man. I'm one who didn't just lay out the blow on the glass table as well and make something out of that. Yes, so I didn't have a lot of sympathy for what happened to Walter when he was totally warned that was going to be the case. So lay off the juice, kids.
Now there's two other sort of cameos in this that are really worthy of mention, Simon. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to fast forward right to the end of the movie and talk about the priest in the film. Do you know who Herb Tanny is?
No. Remember the role? I only watched this movie a little while ago, so no, don't know who that is.
Okay, Herb Tanny, and he's often credited with different names than Herb Tanny. Okay, he's appeared in 19 Blake Edwards movies, which are worthwhile noted because it's his only credits. He only ever appeared in Blake Edwards movies.
What's the connection?
And he's not a professional actor. Okay, which may shock you when you see the appearance. Actually, no, he's perfectly fine in it. There's nothing wrong with his performance. Okay, but he knows Blake Edwards because he's his doctor.
Nice.
Yeah.
Getting cheap doctor work by casting him in all your movies.
Yeah, look, maybe. So I don't know what the medical procedure was where they first met, but it must have been significant. Two other things.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go on. No, actually, I want to hear this.
Thing. The most notable cameo appearance in this is, do you know who the band are at the bar?
Yes, I was wondering if you'd done your research.
Well,
Regular listeners of the podcast will know that for some of the early episodes of Best Movie Year, Dan was quietly obsessed with a little band called Billy, Vera and the Beaters. And who should we come across in Blind Date but...
Billy, Vera and the Beaters are the in-disco band.
Playing at Frida's Discotheque.
Which, the question is, why does the fight break out at the disco? And was it because Billy and the Beaters were that bad? And the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, it wasn't a great song. It was yacht. I mean, it was mid-level yacht rock at best. And we all know from Billy Vera's chart-topping hit ... You'll have to insert that later.
Was it in this moment?
I don't know.
This moment?
Boy,
I think that's it.
I tell you what, I didn't know what Billy Vera looked like before I saw them in this, but if I had to take a guess, this is exactly what someone called Billy Vera looks like.
Yeah, but how did the Beaters hold up to your mind's eye?
Well, they kept a beat. They lived up to their name, but that was about it. So
the last thing, I'm going to call it a cameo, but it's kind of not really.
Okay, we're going deep into the cast list here. All right.
In the last couple of weeks, we have talked about the idea of The Tonight Show and Here's Johnny as a plot point. Okay, I thought it was just kind of notable that they do have the phrase Here's Johnny playing on a TV as Bruce Willis is currently sailing out the side of the house down on like the trellis.
Yep. It's a cultural catch cry that resonated then and now, and we recognise it as such, and I guess the filmmakers did too.
What was the movie? It was like 2 weeks ago we talked about this.
It was in... Email us on bestmovieyear@gmail.com with the answer to whatever that was. Here's Johnny.
It wasn't the Fourth Protocol.
No.
Or something.
Come on, get the list up. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. We'll know by the end of this podcast because I'll talk for a little bit here and you can look it up. 2 points I want to make very quickly. This sort of comedy where there's a violent boyfriend and alcohol plays a part. No, not burglar. It works. Burglar. That's, of course, all right, yes, with the Here's Johnny thing. Yes, that's right, with, the lawyer. This can work when it goes much darker. This sort of film works when Jonathan Demme did it with Something Wild, or when Scorsese does it with After Hours. So there is a very dark-hearted sort of comedy in this that may have played as much more of a pitch black nighttime odyssey sort of thing, but then when it goes to the wedding at the end, then it all falls apart. But it couldn't be. There were too many unsavory elements for this to just be a sweet kind of rom-com. It needed to be. Because you can imagine, this is basically Something Wild if that's Ray Liotta playing the John Larroquette part. And that's a film that's a classic, as is After Hours, quite frankly, my favourite Scorsese film. But yeah, I think it needed more of it. And I do just want to say something on behalf of Rambo, the Doberman. Everyone's yelling at Rambo to stop barking at the end of this film. That's his fucking job. That's what he's there to do. If they'd have just listened to Rambo, they would have caught Bruce Willis and the movie would have been over and we all would have been much, much happier. And then he suffers the ignominy of being brown-eyed by the butler. And that's something I never thought I'd say on a podcast. Well, that's not entirely true. But I think Rambo was badly done by in this film.
Well, the butler certainly did do it, but what I think is, I guess my viewpoint on it's a little bit different. Where I think this movie fails is not so much to like the sweetness or like just the harshness of the way that the characters sort of interact. My problem with the movie is that the characters at no point really act in the way that human beings do.
Very true. You're absolutely right.
There's a lot of behavior which is purely just in service of we need to get from one scene to the next, or we need to make the scene, there needs to be some sort of action taking place within the scene. But like you look at, and it's really evident in the Bruce Willis character from, hey, he starts having a bit of a bad night and then suddenly starts acting really, really crazy. Like, at least the Kim Basinger character, like, there's some sort of engine for that to happen, which is, you don't want to see what happens when she drinks alcohol, okay, and goes all Bruce Banner on the situation. Yeah. Like, that's not really, like, it's dumb, but you can kind of buy into that. Whereas Bruce Willis, his behavior just makes no sense whatsoever. John Larroquette's behavior makes zero sense whatsoever.
And,
he's basically a different character at the back end of the movie.
Yes. And that dumb joke where he keeps driving into shops. First it's a pet shop, then it's a paint shop. I mean, that was just stupid. That whole middle bit was just dumb.
And also the first store is an exotic pet store. And yes, there's a monkey in there, and so you'd expect that. But why are there rabbits? And why are the rabbits like ready to start jumping up in the car immediately? It didn't make sense. Were they waiting for a car to come crashing through that window?
All I can think of all the dead bunnies. It's so sad. Did you have a most memorable scene in this? Could you wade through the mire that was this film and have a most memorable moment?
No, actually, we do, and we played the clip of it a little while ago. It was Phil Hartman doing the convincing of going on the date. I just thought that was actually genuinely very funny and just shows the comedic sort of strength of being able to deliver a great line reading. Okay, and if we want to talk about the strength of a line reading, compare Phil Hartman at the beginning of the movie where he delivers some great lines, great readings of lines, okay, and then the scene where he ends up picking up Bruce Willis from the police station, which also plot point, we'll get to that in a sec, but he's got a couple of lines there where it's like, well, why is your intonation on that? Like, that's just kind of, it's a bit odd. Okay, but can we just talk about the police station?
I jumped ahead then. Yes, please, your turn.
Okay, like right at the end, okay, Bruce Willis has to be bailed out, okay, and the sort of touching emotional moment which kind of resets Bruce Willis's like emotional state is being told that it wasn't actually his brother-in-law, the aforementioned Phil Hartman character, bailing him out, but instead it was Kim Basinger. Okay, but wouldn't Kim Basinger be at the police station still? Like, I don't understand how the person that bails out isn't the person who's also responsible for taking them from the prison.
No, not necessarily. No, you can be bailed out and then just be left to go on your own recognizance. That's not
I don't know, but also like time-wise, I would have thought she'd still be there, especially considering that the next scene is him going and seeing her like asleep. Like essentially, was he bailed out like 7 hours prior?
And
I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up. It is weird because then that leads to that awful scene where she's hungover and he's hungover, and then he berates her in the bed and how he never wants to. He actually went all that way to berate the woman who bailed him out. I thought that was a terrible scene. That was excruciating to watch. The only memorable scene for me, and I remember laughing about it when it happened in the cinema. And is there anything I remember that I knew was coming up in the film was when Walter, who's hiding in the tree, gets hit by a random golf ball. and you hear that on his head and he falls out of the tree. I don't know why I thought that was so funny, but I think I was so desperate to have a laugh by that stage, that's what I zeroed in on. But like I say, I wouldn't call it memorable, but that is the moment I remember from Blind Date, which shouldn't be the case.
And look, honestly, I am kind of curious to know, would I have had a better time watching the movie if I'd seen it on a big screen and had like a few other people that were kind of sort of laughing along, wanting to have a good time with the film?
Like I say, it's a comedy that has its followers, and it was, like I say, a sizable hit in the day, so it conned enough people into thinking it was funny. We can look at it now and see that it isn't. The fact that I think it sort of clocks in at 24% on Rotten Tomatoes, I remember vividly Leonard Maltin's book giving it a pretty, like a 1.5 or a 2-star review.
You don't want to get on the wrong side of Leonard Maltin.
Boy, he'll turn on you. He's a cat, that man. Do you have an MVP for this one? Are you going to go with Hartman again? It's Fartman. It's not Fartman, it's Phil Hartman. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. For me, because she gives it her all, I'm going to give it to Basinger, who's beautiful and talented, and as you know, went on to win the Oscar, so she's got the talent there. But both her and Bruce are not only abandoned by the material, they're sort of abandoned by the movie at different points. They're both kind of cut out at that...
I think they both abandoned the movie midway through.
Yeah, I think they did, but when they go down for the wedding scene in Louisiana, there's a long sequence where it's kind of John Larroquette and the dog and William Daniels sort of slamming doors, and there's very little Kim or Bruce involved in the film, which really said to me that this was a mess and tried to be saved in the editing room, and to little or no avail. Any final thoughts? I'll never speak of it again.
Look, final thoughts. I know that I didn't mention Barry Sobel in the discussion, and I probably won't now. Yeah, look.
Here we are.
Fine to wrap things up, I think.
Yeah.
I will say that I've got a note here that says the last 30 minutes of this movie are among the slowest 30 minutes I've ever experienced in my life.
You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Do we recommend anyone to watch this? No. Do we think that it helps our argument that 1987 is the best movie year ever? I think this is a movie that helped build the following that Bruce had and showed that he could be a movie star, so I'm thankful for that. Is this the movie that made him one? No, it is not.
I guess one of the things that I've really become quite cognizant of while I've been watching these films from 1987, and look, I don't have a large pool of data to pull from to like really sort of back up this thought, but we have talked about a number of comedies on this podcast now, which were huge successes at the time, were a little bit zeitgeisty, and yet they've just been really flat on the screen. Like we saw...
Outrageous Fortune comes to mind.
Yep, yeah, that's the one that comes clearly to mind just for me as well. But a few other comedies as well. Is it just that comedy doesn't really hold up broadly? Like it's the rare comedy that actually does resonate generations later. And so as I look at this and I try to answer that question, does this movie represent the idea that 87 is the best movie year? It all depends on whether or not we're willing to concede the idea that not all comedy does last a standard time. So it doesn't necessarily make it a bad movie year. I'm not sure. It doesn't make it a good experience watching these films in 2025. Though.
Yep, all good points. You went very sort of philosophical and deep there.
It's very late.
Very nuanced. You don't even know what you're talking about now, do you?
What is this movie we're doing? A podcast?
All right, which leads us into what we will be talking about in weeks to come.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry, I wrote a question for myself at the very end of my notes here. Do they stay together after the movie?
They have a bit of a...
Well, they get married, and we know this because of the product placement, the Coca-Cola...
Yeah, they're on the
big champagne.
Yes, that was a big product placement. He's gone back to the guitar.
Yeah.
And they're lying on the beach drinking Coke. Look, yeah, I think they probably do stay together. He understands that she is a wildly irresponsible drunk. She understands that he has to play the guitar to be happy. I think that's all you need in a relationship, isn't it? That's all I've got.
Yeah, look, maybe. Look, there was that scene where you see that after the night, because he obviously doesn't have a job anymore because Kim Basinger ruined that for him. Okay, he goes back to the guitar and he's clearly, pursuing a passion in life. Okay, if at that point it's another 30 minutes afterwards, which as I said are like the slowest that I've ever experienced in my life. If the movie instead, took the rest of its time to look at the way that his life has changed as a result of it, okay, and you start following him into like a new adventure and just setting things up and then maybe encounters her out in the wild once more.
Mm.
Okay, like maybe there's something sort of interesting and poignant about that, but instead it just becomes this dopey, like almost a bedroom farce, but not really at all, and so there's nothing farcical about it.
No, I think we're done. I'm bored talking about it. Let's finish this.
Okay, fair. All right. Well, why don't we talk about Simon
only because if we stop this podcast now, that means we're a little bit closer to talking about Police Academy 4 Citizens on Patrol next week, which is really why we created this podcast.
Look, I'm excited.
I know. And people think we're joking about that, but you are genuinely thrilled to be talking about Police Academy 4 Citizens on Patrol.
Can I tell you now about the last time that I watched Police Academy 4 Citizens on Patrol? And I will tell the story again next week.
Let's save it. Can we save it? Okay. Let's make it short, but poignant.
Short. So back in, I'm going to say about like 2006-ish, which is the last time that I saw this movie. Okay, back in about 2006-ish, I was working with a very peculiar team of people, and we all started joking about Police Academy, and we all thought it would have been very funny if we sat down to the Police Academy marathon with the DVD box set that had just come out, as was the rage at the time, okay,
right,
and sit down and watch all 7 Police Academy movies back to back. And we did that. It was an amazing time for all of us. We're bonded in a way that, you know, you could possibly only ever done so if you'd gone on, say, some sort of police style thing. I'll have a better phrasing for that next week when I tell the same story.
All right, Police Academy 4 Citizens.
That's the last time I watched it as part of a Police Academy marathon. Does the film hold up as a film on its own? I'm excited to find out.
Followed by The Secret of My Success, a Michael J. Fox classic. Followed by Project X, followed by Extreme Prejudice. This is a big month of movie watching we've got ahead of us. All films that I'm very familiar with. I think you've maybe seen 2 of those, have you? Academy 4 and Secret of My Success?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 of them are favourites. I'm kind of curious now how both of them hold up. What was the other films? It was
Project X with Matthew Broderick, the monkey astronaut movie.
I know I've seen part of that movie at least.
The monkey stuff.
Sure. But I don't know was it Extreme Measures?
Extreme Prejudice. You are in for such a treat.
Extreme Measures is the
Hugh Grant, Gene Hackman one, isn't it?
No, it's not Gene Hackman. It's Michael Keaton, isn't it?
You sure it's Gene Hackman in Extreme Measures with Hugh Grant?
Is Michael Keaton in it as well, or am I confusing another Michael Keaton joint from the late 90s?
You're confusing it with Pacific Heights.
Oh, that's a fantastic film. I won't take that out of your dirty mouth.
All right, let's wrap up this week's best movie year. Erring on the side of no is Blind Date made 1987 the best movie year ever, but I'm sure we'll counter that argument next week with Police Academy 4. Good night, Dan Barrett.
Good night, sir. We'll be back next week as we yuck it up with the crew from Police Academy. See you then.